Hi, this is Steve Hunt, the Vice President of Customer Value Realization for SuccessFactors SAP HCM. Thanks for coming back to the second unit in week one of our course on SuccessFactors technology and HCM process design. In the first unit of this week, I talked about what is HCM at a general level. Now I'm going to dive a little more detailed into this concept of integrated HR processes and integrated HCM, which is a big benefit of technology. And then we're going to talk more in the next units about why this is important to business and how to basically design this technology effectively. But one of the things that technology is really doing for human capital management is allowing us to operate in a more integrated fashion. So historically, if you went back into companies, they would have a department for staffing people, and they'd hire them, then they'd throw them over the fence to another group that did training people, and then throw them over the fence to another group that did managing of people, and they'd throw them over the fence to another group that did paying the people. And as one of our customers told me, the only thing that integrated those processes was the poor employee subjected to all of them. That is changing. One of the benefits of technology is it allows you to integrate these. So it's more efficient, but there's also tremendous benefit in terms of more effectively changing people's behavior. Better engagement of employees, because what's interesting about human capital management is the four processes I was talking about: right way, right people, right things, right development, work the most effective when they play off of each other. So let me talk a little more about that. So, and last time I said, basically HCM, well, there's a lot of terms for it: 360 development, performance management, succession management. There's all these different things that go into HCM. It's basically four things. It's processes to get the right people in the right job to begin with, processes to get focused people on the right things, processes to give them feedback so they're doing things the right way, and processes to do the first three in a way that gives people experiences so they can develop new capabilities. And remember, training is a form of experience, but job assignments is also probably even a more effective form of experience. But basically, people learn from doing things they haven't done before, so that's what the right development is about. Now, we look at these four things. Psychologically, they're very different things. Right people is about matching people to the demands of jobs based on their underlying attributes. Right things is about focusing attention and motivation and sort of exposing people to sort of working on different projects, what they should be thinking about and focusing their time on. Right way is how they're actually doing their job and giving them feedback. And right development is about giving people experiences in a way that they can learn from those experiences. So there are four different things psychologically, but if you look at how they work together, you should really not think of them as four sort of columns, but think of them as a pyramid. The four sides of a pyramid, because you don't get to the top of a pyramid by just building one side. You really need to bring the different sides together to reach sort of the highest level of maturity, the highest sort of peak. And give you an example. If you look at sort of the idea of a lot of companies say, look, we want to create a talent pipeline in our organization, which is we want to manage the organization, so we bring talent in, we develop people over time, they move into new roles, we move them into higher roles, we have a steady supply of high performers in the organization. What does that take? One, you need to hire people, but you need to hire people in jobs thinking about the kind of development you're going to provide with them. And then when you develop people, what's the best way to develop them? By giving them job assignments, that is right, focusing on the right things, that enable them to develop. And when they develop these new skills, well, they're going to want to do something different, which means right people. So these things all come together. And I'll give a more sort of detailed example in a second. But really think about how these pull together. Now the other thing that's interesting about integrating this technology is the role of the HRIS, or the basic core data that tells you who are the employees in the company, what jobs they have, kind of keeps track of, the administrative side. That provides a platform for these more strategic platforms so that, for example, if I'm looking at talent flow, I need to know what are the jobs people are in. I need to know the job titles. I need to know the reporting structure. So that will give me a sense into where does it make sense for them to help move into the organization, and will inform how I develop people, how I manage people. And the other place is how do we get this sort of stuff all pulled together is through workforce analytics. How do we take data on people's performance and combine it with data on their career goals and data on their current job and data on their tenure in their job, and bring that together and get an understanding of the organization overall. So all these things become much more powerful when you start thinking about how can we pull them together. So I'm going to give three examples of what I mean by integration. The first example is let's talk about process maturity. If you think about process maturity of those four basic processes, right people, right things, right development, right way, they say you don't get to the top by just building one side. As a matter of fact, if you don't think about the integration, you'll get stuck at a relatively low level of maturity. And I'll give you an example for right people and right development. At the lowest level, a maturity in these processes. So those lowest level processes for getting the right people in the right jobs is basic what's called applicant tracking functionality. Do you have some way for managers to post jobs and some way to fill those jobs? Just very basic filling open positions, automating the process for putting people into jobs. The lowest level of right development is, do you have some way for people that do personal career development? Do they have individual development plans? Are employees thinking about how they're going to build their capabilities? At this level, these two things are completely siloed. They really have nothing to do with each other. If you go up a level on right people, it's not just filling positions, it's about selecting high performers. Are we assessing people against clearly defined job requirements and competency models, so we're making sure we're putting the right people in the right job, using things like structured interviewing, effective sourcing techniques to make sure that we're basically identifying the right candidates and hiring the right candidates. Well, if you go up on right developmental level, it's not just are people developing themselves. Are they developing towards the things we want them to do in their job? Is it targeted development? Ideally, it's the same competency model that you're hiring people against and you're developing them against. So you start to see how these things start to come together. And that's an advantage of technologies. You can make sure you're using consistent competency models across different functions. Well, if you go up another level on right people, it's building talent pools. And this is about recognizing that the quality of who you hire is entirely determined by the quality of who applies for the job to begin with. And one of the best sources of talent, at least in a large company, is internal employees. Well, if you go on right development, the next level up is something called business-driven development, which is managing the workforce to build their capabilities for future opportunities. So giving people job assignments that will allow them to take on new jobs in the organization, building internal talent pools. So you see how these already come together at this point. A great example of this is one of our customers realized that they needed more people that had global leadership experience. They were struggling to fill global leadership roles, and so they changed the way that they made global assignments and didn't make global assignments based on who wants to do it or has done it in the past. They did it based on who we think could be a global leader, and so they'd actually manage their workforce to support their staffing. If you go to the highest level, which just says talent pipelines, this is about bringing people in the organization, putting them to jobs and giving them development that will enable them to move into other jobs so that we have a steady supply of high-performing talent. At this level, right people and right development are completely intertwined. And by the way, if you tried to get to this highest level without doing both sides, you'd run into issues like, one, if you try to do too much development and you don't marry that up with how you staff people, you're going to develop employees who are going to be ready for other assignments. They're not going to be hired. They're not going to have any opportunity in the organization, so they're going to leave. Conversely, if you build talent pipelines and you really focus on sort of sourcing internally, but you're not developing employees, yeah, you'll have talent pipelines, but they'll be empty because you're not building the talent you need to fill them. So this is sort of the idea. You want to think about how these things come together. Now, not only is it important from a maturity level, it's also important for sort of maximizing the effectiveness of different processes, that you think about how different steps in HCM need to complement and connect with each other. And where this really comes out particularly is in processes around managing the workforce itself, as opposed to filling positions. You're thinking about managing the workforce. Now, if you're managing the workforce, if you step away again from the technology and you just start thinking about, well, what are the basic questions that we need to answer if I'm managing the workforce, regardless of whether or not I have HCM technology? The first one is, what do people need to accomplish? And are they focusing on it? If you're managing a workforce, basically, what are people focusing on right now? This is about goal management. Are you setting goals? Are you giving clear objectives to employees? Updating those objectives. This is regular business operations. Basically, regular meetings with managers saying, are people focusing on the things that matter for the company? This is going on all the time. This is really important. But if you want to maximize the performance of your workforce, you also need to take it out another level, which is looking at these questions. And not only are people focusing on what's important, but are employees doing this effectively? Are there ways we can help employees be more effective in their current role? How are employees doing overall in the job? Do they need feedback? Are they on target to do it? Are they doing the right things in the right way? What have they contributed? Are people meeting expectations? Do we have the people in the right roles? Are people exceeding expectations? And in that, where should people go in future roles based on what they're doing now? This is about really, embracing the employees and thinking about employee effectiveness, not so they just know what to do, but are they actually doing it and doing it the right way? This is where kind of performance management and coaching comes in. And so you look at that sort of cycle, and this is about giving behavioral feedback to employees, paying attention to what they're doing, kind of giving them recognition and rewards. But you want to tie this to the operational side, because you want to give that recognition reward based on, are you contributing to what the company needs you to do, and are you doing the right things in the right way, in a way that's sort of maximizing your productivity and your engagement. Now, there's another thing that you've got to think about, and it's sort of off to the side, but it's important, is you also have to think about how are we going to deal with underperformance. Most of your employees, hopefully, are not going to be underperformers, but when you do encounter them, you need to have some way to manage that, because if there's one thing that high performers really hate, it's working with low performers. Not to mention it sets a bad example. So you want to think about what happens if in this cycle of looking at somebody's work, somebody's just not getting the job done. We have to have somewhere to manage that. And that has to be associated, but not so necessarily part of the everyday process, but it needs to be tied in. Then you've got to think through the next questions that get into more about overall workforce management, which is, who are our high performers? Who are the most valuable players that we should be investing in because they're contributing the most to us? And how should the company utilize its workforce resources? Our business strategies are changing. We need to move people into different roles. Employees are dynamic. They want to move into different roles. And this gets into a whole series of questions around learning and development, staffing decisions, succession planning, workforce planning, compensation, workforce budgeting. Now, the data that should feed into those decisions, though, is this data that came from manager-employee conversations around, are you doing the right job in the right way, getting the right things in the right development? That needs to feed into these overall staffing decisions. And this is a big disconnect in a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations, when they make decisions like restructuring, they really don't think about the talent they have available. They may know the job titles, but they treat everyone like they're exactly the same, but they're not exactly the same. Really effective workforce management takes into account the individual differences in the performance and capabilities of the employees you're managing, where you learn about those individual differences in performance and capabilities from the performance management and goal management, the conversation between managers and employees. And so looking at how can we tie together ongoing goal management, performance management, having feed into things like succession management, and then of course, you want it to all feed back in too, because when you make succession management decisions and staffing decisions, you want it to feed back into people's career development and sort of goal planning and all those things. So you see how these things really need to tie together. And technology is critical for making this happen, but I'll tell you, if you don't think about this integration, you'll end up developing these things standalone and not thinking about how does data from one need to feed into the other. And the interesting thing too about this is performance management is a great example. One of the main reasons performance management systems don't work is because nobody ever looks at the performance management data other than the manager and the employee. So they're like, hey, we know what your performance is. Why should I care about what I put in this form? If the performance management data feeds into succession management and learning decisions that are made by people other than the employee and manager but affects their career, they take that data more seriously. When they take that data more seriously, it gets more accurate, people want to use it more, and you create sort of this virtual cycle. Good data leads to good usage. But conversely, if you don't use the data, people aren't going to use it, they're not going to have interest in it, so you really kind of have to look at that integration, which ties these things together and makes them all more effective. One other way of thinking about integration at a more point level is, and there really is, I showed this example to say there's really almost no part of strategic HCM that should ever be implemented by itself. Because there's almost nothing we do when it comes to predicting and changing people's behavior that sort of we should do in isolation. And I'll use an example of like developmental interventions. You can succession management, career development, social learning, which is like, YouTube videos and social learning, Facebook type stuff for the workplace. 360 surveys give people feedback, learning management and training systems, and onboarding systems, which would help people move into new jobs. These are all different forms of development. But if you look at them, you realize they all should connect with each other. For example, succession management and career development. People's career development should be influenced by the kind of jobs we want people to employ for. There should be a connection between what we're looking at in succession management and what we're looking at in career development. Similarly, with career development should tie into our social learning capabilities. Kind of think, who else in the organization should be helping this employee develop? How can we create mentoring relationships? Development shouldn't be done in isolation. Social learning should tie in the tools we give to give people feedback. So if I'm trying to develop a new capability, if I have a mentoring relationship, maybe there's feedback that I could use from like a formalized assessment tool that would help me develop. Similarly, 360 surveys should tie into learning management because, hey, if I take a 360 survey, it tells me I need to build certain competencies. What am I getting the training for? There should be a link there. Learning management should tie into new roles. So when I'm looking at the training we provide, it should support helping people get into new roles and moving into the organization. There should be a link between the training we have and the onboarding we use for different roles. And obviously onboarding going on should tie back into succession, because as you're moving leaders into new roles, part of that is onboarding into these new roles. So thinking about how all these things different tie together. And the technology allows you to do this, but it won't do it if you don't think through these things in advance. And I could go on. I mean, there's a connection between every single one of these. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the main point is, you have the slide, you can look at the questions yourself. The main point is, whenever you're implementing something in HCM, always think about what should this tie to, because there's always something else that it should tie to. Don't think of these things in isolation. And the last point on integration is, think about how your own HR organization is structured. Divided HR departments foster divided HR processes. In the United States, we often talk about siloed organizations. It refers to these grain silos, where the only connection between them is at the very top, and they don't interact with each other, and it leads to this sort of quote that the only thing that integrates our HR functions are the employees that have to work for them. You don't want that. So first of all, avoid siloed HR organizations. Make sure, do we have a single unified HR team? Is the department, often you go to a company and the different departments will have different tools and different technology. Get everyone on the same system. So the employee's not going from one system for staffing, another system for development. They should see a constant interface across all the different HR functions. Even if the technology behind the scenes is different, make it look the same to the employees. And create incentive for collaborating, so people want to work together as you run your HR organization. And just sort of an example, I've seen the opposite of a really quick sort of story. It's funny. I was working with a company once, and their succession management director was working with me, and I said, hey, we should bring in a recruiting director. And he said, well, I agree with you, except for our recruiting director is incented on external hires, and I'm incented on internal promotions. We're at war with each other. Avoid that. That's bad. What you want to focus on is really integrated HR leadership teams. Think about, does your HR department have an integrated vision and roadmap? Do different HR leaders regularly meet together? Do you get performance compensation? Because, as I said, if you don't get these people working together, you're going to have a disjointed process, and you're going to get stuck at very low levels of maturity, because the maturity and real magic of HCM and HCM technology happens when integration happens. And next, we're going to talk about why this stuff is so important. Thank you.